provides a lot of interesting events, particularly around international affairs, is Bob Kennedy, the president. Bob, and I'd love for you to provide some comments about the ACIR's interest in this topic and this country, the Philippines, and just give our listeners and eventual readers of our summary article a sense for what the ACIR does and where your interests lie.
Thank you very much, Trevor. It's a special pleasure of the Atlanta Council on International Relations to join Global Atlanta in sponsoring today's program with His Excellency Jose Manuel Romualdez, the Ambassador of the Republic of Philippines to the United States. Thanks to the foresight of publisher Phil Bolton and you, Trevor, as managing editor, Global Atlanta, in my view, has done a terrific job in bringing Atlanta exceptional in-depth reporting, as you mentioned, on issues of global significance. So we match very well together in our interests in that area with Global Atlanta, as well as keeping people here in the Atlanta area informed of the local community successes abroad, as well as how foreign enterprises fuel Atlanta's dynamic growth economically. As many of you know, the relationship between the United States and the Philippines is based on strong historical and cultural links and a shared commitment to democracy and human rights, as well as commercial and a very high degree of people-to-people ties. In recognition of the close cooperation between our two nations, in 2003, the United States designated the Philippines as a major non-NATO ally. Moreover, our two nations regularly engage in a strategic dialogue on a variety of issues such as defense, security, economics, development, and other regional and global issues. I might add that ties have been further reinforced by an estimated 4 million US citizens that live of Philippine ancestry living in the United States, and more than about 220,000 US citizens living in the Philippines. I might further add that about 6,500 Americans travel to the Philippines each year. Unfortunately, not this year. And Ray, thanks for the remarkable job, Ray Donato, thanks for the remarkable job you have been doing here as Honorary Consul General to help us better understand the relationship between our two countries. So ACIR has been involved in a lot of efforts in a nonpartisan way to bring knowledge about international affairs to the Atlanta community. So in this regard, it's a great pleasure once again for ACIR to join Global Atlanta in this effort to help better understand the Philippine-US partnership. Thanks so much, Trevor.
I knew I could rely on Bob to lay the groundwork very well, which is something the ACIR does quite well at its own events. And Global Atlanta tends to focus so heavily on the business. Sometimes we're not as well versed in security and military topics that the ACIR covers so well. I want to introduce the ambassador very briefly. I want to remind our listeners to please turn off your videos if you might. That will help preserve some bandwidth for our speakers, and keep your microphone muted so that we ensure that we don't have any interference. If you do have questions, we will have a time for Q&A at the end, and that will be the time where you will send questions my way in the chat function, and I will make sure to do as well as I can to get them to the ambassador. I'm going to do a brief introduction, as I mentioned. Jose Manuel Romualdez was appointed Ambassador of the Republic of the Philippines to the U.S. in July 2017 by President Duterte, and presented his credentials in November of 2017. He also represents the Philippines to the Caribbean as well. I won't list all the various nations and islands there, but has that concurrent post. He was a special envoy of the President to the United States before becoming ambassador. And he's got many other accolades to his name, but I think the one that most interests me is that he was a former media executive and is a columnist. He writes a column for the Philippine Star, He was once the chief executive of Stargate Media Corporation, publisher of People Asia magazine, and was president of the Manila Overseas Press Club and vice president of the Rotary Club. So we've got a person who understands media, so I don't have to explain that side of what I'm trying to achieve here to the ambassador. Ambassador, if you would like to provide some opening comments before we jump into the questioning, I would welcome that. Thank you so much for taking your time and being here with us.
Thank you very much, Trevor. And let me thank you and Global Atlanta for inviting me. And of course, I'd like to greet our honorary consul, my good friend, Mr. Ray Donato, who's been with our honorary consul for many, many years. And I think he's done a great job in interacting with many of the people in Atlanta. And also, of course, our Filipino American community there. I'd like to also greet Mr. Robert Kennedy. Thank you very much for giving that background, which gives us more time for question and answer. So I'll just go right straight to our, what I feel today is one of the most challenging times that we've had, not only in the world, but in the relationship that we have with the United States and of course the Philippines and the Asian region. As you all know, we've had quite a lot of challenges in the past 2 to 3 years, and mainly because of a very strong movement coming from the north. And needless to say that this challenge has been very, I would say, walking a tightrope, because while we would like to reach out to China, our relationship with the United States is very important to us, and we want to make sure that that relationship remains strong. The reason why we feel, and most Asian countries are also in that situation, is that China is a country that we cannot ignore. It's a big country, it has economic power, and it's not too far away from our shores. And so while we have a lot of disputes in the West Philippine Sea, we have to continue to try to continue our dialogue with them. And aside from that, the challenge, of course, today is the world economy and, of course, the challenges faced by this pandemic. You cannot just imagine the enormity of the problems that we have in the Philippines. As you know, we're 110 million people, and because of the congestion, well, the overpopulation in many of the urban areas, trying to manage and control this pandemic has been not only challenging, but absolutely difficult. So we are faced with that. And of course, we have people who are also saying that it's a choice between dying of the pandemic or just dying of hunger. Right. This is, of course, something that the government is very aware of. And so we're looking at many countries who are developing the vaccine as our really only way out of this nightmare. But at the same time, we have to also continue and doing what we can as far as the economy is concerned, because we also have over 10 million overseas workers who have, many of them have lost their jobs and are now back in the Philippines. So these are the challenges that we face today in the Philippines, and we really appreciate the work that is being done, not only here by the many people who continue to keep the relationship strong. 85% of Filipinos believe that the United States is our friend and an ally, and we value it. And we want to make sure that no matter who the president is here in the United States, we will continue that relationship. So now I look forward to the question and answer, and I certainly hope I'll be able to answer all your questions exactly what you want me to say. Thank you.
Well, we'll work on that. You've certainly whet our appetite with that opening, those opening remarks, and I think I'd like to dig a little bit down further on the COVID-19 question on the pandemic. Of course, y'all had one of the most, the earliest and most sweeping shutdowns of any country, I think, along with places like India, really trying to aggressively flatten that curve. But now you've seen the cases start to creep up with reopening, and I think even there's been a reimposed lockdown around Manila, if I don't understanding correctly. So can you tell us a little bit about the decision-making process around how you mentioned the balance between the economy and health, obviously, but how did you make those decisions around the shutdown early on, and then how have you kind of reevaluated it on balancing those two factors?
Well, like I said, our economic managers, together with our health officials, were especially in the task force formed by the president, were in daily discussions on how to manage this pandemic. Of course, the lockdown that we had starting in March all the way down up to the end of April for a couple of months, obviously was a big help in controlling the pandemic. But then again, we have a lot of people who depend on their daily wages. And so it was a choice between opening the economy and just keep on staying in the lockdown. And we don't have all the resources really needed to keep things going. So we had to make that move with the hope that we will be able to control it by communities rather than by the entire country or the entire city of Manila, for instance, where most of the jobs are located, and in the urban areas like Cebu and other parts of in the south. So this was really a decision that had to be made. And as I said earlier, it was, for many people, it was a choice between dying of hunger or dying of the pandemic. And they say that we'd rather die of the pandemic. Not realizing, of course, that how serious this pandemic is, that can really be one of the worst, perhaps a very difficult way if you're going to go leave this earth. But so it was that decision that we had to make, and so they opened the economy, just like perhaps what happened here in the United States. We didn't have the same problem as you had, that you had a lot of youngsters that didn't really think how serious this was. We had people really who just had to go to work and to really earn a living. That was really what, and so the movement started, and so that's why there is a spike. And many experts have already said on many occasions that really this pandemic is so contagious that sometimes no matter what you do, there will always be some form of spread. It is really a question of managing it as well as you can. And so we're in a situation now that we're in a lockdown, but we don't know for how long we can continue this because, as I said, people are really suffering from having to find some work, their work, to continue to earn a living and feed families.
Well, I see that. I think it's around 143,000 cases at this moment, which makes the Philippines second, I think, in Southeast Asia, behind Indonesia. But of course, we the U.S. is obviously in no position to lecture anybody on COVID-19 response. But it should be noted that, like you said, there's 110 million people in the Philippines. So it's not as if this is a small country with few people that's seeing a massive spike. I mean, I think you're right to point out that with economic activity resuming, there's almost no way to keep it completely under wraps. But I think you've intimated why, or you've kind of described why the Philippines is so aggressive in trying to procure vaccine supplies when those become available. Your president this week has announced that he wants to be, or he will be, the first tested with a vaccine from Russia if the Philippines is able to procure those supplies. Russia claims to be the first to have developed a finalized vaccine. Of course, some people are worried about cutting corners and that this was kind of rushed to market. But even before that, your president has talked about trying to secure those supplies from China should they become available first. So how do you balance the need to get that quickly with obviously making sure that it's a safe process and one that can be distributed equitably among your people?
Well, I venture to guess that the president really is one that has, I would say, really tried to give the people, especially his political base, the hope that they have that that the vaccine will soon come. And so whenever there's some good news, like even if I know that there's a lot of questions about the Russian vaccine, he just wants to be able to impart a message that if this is something that will work, then I'm willing to be the first to take it. You know, we have, and I know this for a fact, that I get a lot of people who call me or email me from the Philippines, and the anxiety level is so high that sometimes, you know, we start to be desperate and try to see what it is that can really get us out of this nightmare. And I think that, but there's no question that our health officials will definitely check this vaccine and make sure that it works definitely before they inject it on the president. But we're very cognizant of what the safety measures that have to be taken. As a matter of fact, we've had a number of meetings with many pharmaceutical companies here in the United States, the leading ones like Moderna and Novavax and Pfizer. And our health officials would have to check these vaccines, even if it's been approved here in the United States, because we've had a very bad experience in the past. This is what we call the Dengvaxia. This was produced in France, and there were many people who were injected with this vaccine, and many have died. So we're very aware of that, and our health officials are definitely very much aware of that. Plus the fact that I only learned, I thought it was just as easy when the vaccines come out, everybody can get it. Apparently, race has a role to play here. It may work with Caucasians or with other races, but for Filipinos and or Asians, it may be something else. So these are things that obviously it needs to be well studied before we go on. You know, as they say, the cure may be worse than the pandemic itself.
Exactly. Yeah. So how do you, as a country that, you know, is not maybe involved in as many of the discussions as a country like the U.S., how do you feel about this idea of you know, vaccine nationalism, or, you know, that we should hoard vaccines for our own people, particularly when you have a vulnerable population, not as much manufacturing capacity to create it on your own? What mechanisms do you think would be helpful in the international realm to ensure globally that we don't you know, keep this to ourselves and ensure that everybody has as much access as possible?
Well, there is no question that this pandemic is a worldwide problem, and no nation can claim to be free from it. We all know that. That's a fact. And so we're members of the global coalition. I think it's sponsored by the World Health Organization. And we call it the Solidarity Vaccines, from about 150 participants. And I'm not sure whether the United States is part of it, but certainly would like to see that happen, because there's no way any country can protect itself. Even if you close your borders for so many years, it'll still come to somehow, somewhere, it'll still get there. So we've learned that, I think, from the 1918 pandemic, that it's a worldwide problem, and every country, and as Dr. Fauci, who's very well respected even in my country, said that we need at least a 60% immunity of the world population. So we're talking here of at least 6 to 7 billion people have to have the vaccine, and no country or no pharmaceutical company alone can supply that. It is a worldwide problem, something that needs to be shared by everybody, including China. So while we have there's a lot finger pointing on where it started, why it started, but they too have to play a role in making sure that this vaccine, or whatever it is, to keep the world safe and immunized is very important for us if we're out to survive as a global community.
Definitely. I'd like to speak about a little bit about the economic impacts more so far. I mean, one of the things I've noted with interest, obviously Bob mentioned 4 million Filipinos here in the U.S. Remittances, I know, are a major part of your GDP. I think it was something like 9% in 2019. The sending of money back home. You mentioned that folks are coming back home as well during the pandemic, so you sort of have this double impact of losing the remittances and also having to employ more people locally than you might have otherwise. Can you drill down a little bit on the economic impact, how severe it is, and maybe how much of a hit you've taken from the loss of remittances?
Well, so far, the figures show that we've had about a 20% drop in the remittances. That is a very significant amount, of course. And of course, I mean, just to say, many of these overseas workers take care of their families. The only silver lining that we see there is that many of these overseas workers, quite a number of them actually, as reported to us by some of our economic indicators, show that many of them have some savings, that they're going back to their provinces and starting small businesses, which we encourage very much. And as a matter of fact, I had a meeting with our Secretary of Finance and our Secretary of Trade, and I told them that's probably one way of being able to keep the economy going. They go home to their provinces, small little stores, so open up whatever it is that could keep the economy going, and of course feed their families. That's one way. And one thing that I can say about Filipinos is that we are a very resilient people, and we're used to suffering. I know that many of us did not go through the difficulties during the war, but I know that our parents and many others have said that those were very difficult times, and yet we survived it. And we're a type of people that's not afraid to sacrifice, which is what our overseas workers are. And we definitely would like to take care of them. We have an entire department that was just formed recently just to take care of our overseas workers. They are very valuable to us. We want them to come home eventually and just not having to leave, but as of now, they are a very strong backbone to our economy. Fortunately, our central bank has reported that we have a large cushion, so to speak, but a lot of these resources obviously are very important to keep our economy afloat. And at the same time, the government's program of infrastructure will continue no matter what, because that is one way of really development and keeping jobs moving, especially throughout the entire country. Hopefully, as I said, this pandemic will be controlled in the world so that things will start going back to normal. And we're hopeful by early next year that that should happen, hopefully.
Great. Well, talk to us about the state of U.S.-Philippines relations. It seems, we've got two presidents who are very strong nationalists, you could call them if you want to boil it down to that, but very much about the self-reliance of their own countries and reframing their international relationships in ways that are beneficial for the domestic scene. So you've obviously moved back and forth between the two presidents as special envoy. Is there a camaraderie there at all? We tend to see the heavy words in the press, but we don't know about the relationships that go on behind the scenes. Tell us a little bit about that relationship between Trump and Duterte, and maybe what we misunderstand potentially about that.
Well, fortunately, President Trump, when he came to Manila in November of 2017, I'm sorry, it was earlier than that, for the ASEAN summit. Obviously, he met with President Duterte, and they hit it off very well. And I think mainly because President Trump understood what the president was doing with the issues surrounding the drug war, and he knew that the problems that we have with the drugs, that President Duterte's campaign promised that he was going to eradicate the drugs, which he admits today has not been extremely successful. So the issue on the human rights was, of course, one of the ticklish issues that were at least sort of like minimized. We recognize that very much, and there's no doubt that we don't want to have that to happen. And as a matter of fact, we've had so many police officers that have been charged and they've also been removed, and they themselves were involved in drugs. Unfortunately, of course, we have a U.S. Congress that is obviously dominated by Democrats, especially in the lower house, and we've had a number of issues. It's been very challenging, to say the least, especially for me. I've tried my best to meet with them before this pandemic for many times, as a matter of fact. And I just simply told them that the President Duterte is very sensitive about sovereignty issues. I think that one very unfortunate comment made by one U.S. Senator was that we have a right to meddle into your business because we give you money. Not in those words, but basically that was the meaning of that. And that
never goes over well.
Not at all. I mean, anybody for that matter. I mean, if you give something or whatever, hey, of course, there's always an underlying reason why you do that, but you don't have to spell it out and say it publicly. And this is what we've been trying to do really here, is that there are all of these issues that were being thrown our way can be discussed in a manner that we do either through diplomatic channels or even face-to-face. And we recognize it. We recognize that there are these issues. And we remember our Constitution now is patterned after the United States. We have almost exactly the same justice system, and that's why my message to many of our friends in the U.S. Congress is help us to strengthen our justice system. There's a lot to be desired, and I'm sure you have the same problem here too. You do have human rights problems here, and the recent problems that you've had obviously show that, and all countries suffer from that, one way or the other, and no one wants to let it remain that way. We all want to have a better world and a better place for all peoples.
I definitely want to circle back to that if we have time, for sure, because that's an interesting point, especially given the anti-terrorism law that's just passed and some of the press issues. If we have time, I want to address that. But more poignantly, I think right now, we've recently passed the 4-year mark, the 4-year anniversary of this arbitral award that was, showing that the Philippines has the right to its exclusive economic zone versus, in the face of incursions from China. You mentioned President Duterte being very strong on sovereignty issues, but some have seen him sort of capitulating to China in certain ways. Recently he said basically China's already in possession of its area that it claims, the 9-dash line in the South China Sea, that's been problematic for most democratic countries in the region, especially those claimants to certain islands in the sea. I know that we've got the Director General's office from the Taiwanese Taipei Economic and Cultural Office here. So I'm sure they're very interested in this conversation as well. But can you just give us a framework for how the Philippines is thinking about standing up to China? Obviously, no one wants to start a war, and one of your vice admirals recently has said, the first one to shoot loses, in the sense that you lose international support for your claims. So how is the Philippines addressing this, and is there concern that if there's not a more strident enforcement of your arbitral award in particular, which is in line with international law, that China will continue to grow in power in that region?
Okay, well, I will try my best to be a little candid, and I certainly hope that this is something that I'll share with the many people who are attending this webinar. But
sure,
just to give you a little background, that this problem with China has been around for many, many years. Long before President Duterte became president, and then 2 previous administrations in the Philippines and here in the United States. When China started to claim many of these reefs, we obviously turned to the United States being our #1 ally, and then told them about this incursions being made by China. And the line that was always given to us is that we do not get involved in territorial disputes. Obviously, that was a letdown. I happen to know our foreign secretary during the time of President Aquino, and he was very downhearted, of course. And in fact, there was not really much encouragement when we filed the case with the arbitral court coming from the United States. But we did go ahead anyway, because as you know, the United States is not a member of UNCLOS. So when we filed that case, we hired an American lawyer to help us, and we won the case. And that obviously was great. But at the same time, the United States also, we again were telling them that the Chinese are not even honoring this, but they're starting to build out on these reefs. As we all know now, photos have been shown publicly that there are airstrips. I would think that they are, in fact, military bases. This, of course, obviously alarmed many people in the Philippines, especially the government and our armed forces. So we were sort of like left holding the bag. What are we going to do? I mean, this is a big country. We don't have the wherewithal to fight them tooth and nail. And also, aside from that, the Scarborough Shoal is another big issue that came about during those days. We were occupying the Scarborough Shoal, and China occupied the other part of the Scarborough Shoal. And we were told, again, by the United States, so that we can reduce the tension, perhaps it's best for you to just leave, and then we will take care of China. We left. China stayed, and it remained that way. So you can see that at that particular time, the decision has to be made. What are we going to do now? We're sort of like on our own. So President Duterte decided, because the Chinese stopped talking to us, and there was no real high-level communication. And so it was a very tense situation we were in. And so President Duterte reached out to China and to bring down the level of tension, and China promised that we will talk bilaterally and we will discuss this and so forth and so on. Of course, we went to the ASEAN. Some nations were a little bit ambivalent about coming out with a strong statement. So again, that particular forum wasn't there. And only recently with the United States came around, and now with Secretary Pompeo announcing that this is illegal, this is not true. And so you have a lot of nations coming into, and of course now what we won in the arbitral court is now being used as an example to fight back on this one. Yeah. But it's still very tense. The Chinese are still very adamant about it. They still continue to say that it is ours and no country can tell us what to do. So we are at the situation now, and we're now caught between the devil and the deep blue sea, so to speak, almost literally. So we need to balance this again. And so, because we've reached out to China, and they promised us that they are going to peacefully resolve this. And of course, we're hanging on to that as much as we can, because, again, we do not have the wherewithal to fight them. That's the bottom line. The United States has now taken the lead in enforcing, informally, I guess, by telling China that what they have done is illegal. We have a number of countries in the ASEAN region that have chimed in and are now pushing the same thing. And we hope that at some point in time, the Chinese government will come around and start really seriously talking about how to resolve this issue. But as you said, nobody wants to go into a war, and especially with the situation that we're all in today.
Does that sense that that there has been a shift in mindset, or a little bit of a stronger posture towards China? Is that what's behind this decision to rethink the abrogation of the visiting forces agreement? I mean, is it tied directly to that, or I know it's only a 6-month reprieve. Could you give our readers a sense for what's going on with that?
Well, President Duterte has assured Secretary Pompeo when he did come to the Philippines, I can't remember exactly, sometime last year, where they had a brief meeting at the airport when Secretary Pompeo came from Vietnam for the North Korean summit. In that meeting, President Duterte said that we have no problem with the United States. We want to continue our relationship with a strong ally, but he said that there are some issues on the sovereignty that we must resolve, and we cannot allow another nation to tell us how to solve our problems because they can't solve. And remember, we have a history of precisely when we were looking at the United States to help us resolve an international issue with China, there was very little support, at least in the view of the government, that they were keen on confronting the Chinese government. So we were basically left on our own to really take care of ourselves. But having said that, as I said, the issue of sovereignty is a very important issue that our president has always said, and we're prepared to talk to anybody, but you do not have to publicly chastise us and tell us that you give us money and therefore we have a right to meddle into your business. That's something that remains very strong in the mind of the president and many people for that matter. But 85% of Filipinos believe that our relationship with the United States is the relationship that is the right relationship, and many of us agree on that point. So, as I said, we have to, the VFA, the Visiting Forces Agreement, is something that we will see on how in the succeeding 4 years, perhaps either President Trump or a Biden presidency, we will see how that relationship goes. And I really hope that the message that we give, that we value our relationship and our friendship, that we have to understand each other's problems and that we will help each other resolve it rather than confronting issues in a very direct and unfortunate manner. And as you know,
right.
Asians have, many Asians are the type that you can insult us, but you do it privately, that's okay.
Exactly. Yeah, we don't want to lose face, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So it would seem that if we could strengthen our economic ties, that maybe some of these conversations would happen in a different way. I don't know if you share that view, but it seems that the Philippines, in my limited understanding, lags some other countries in Southeast Asia in particular in terms of its clout when it comes to economic issues. Vietnam has particularly been seeing a lot of growth recently with countries or companies deciding that they're going to move some of their supply chains out of China. Indonesia, obviously another country with a huge population, is trying to capitalize on this movement of manufacturing capacity in particular. But given our people-to-people links, it would seem that we could have some stronger ties. Where do you see that going, and particularly in light of this reshaping of global supply chains in the short run?
Well, for many years now, the Philippines has been having a problem with a overly nationalistic constitution, which, in my view, on my own private capacity, and in my own businesses, we've had partnerships with many American companies in the past. And the biggest problem has always been they can't own land. They can only own up to 40% of a company, especially when it involves so-called telecoms and all that stuff. All of that has taken its toll with us, and we have well, sad to say, we have a lot of people, or too many cooks spoil the broth, so to speak. So we have quite enough of that. But we're beginning to see that our competition, our competitors, specifically Vietnam and Indonesia, but more I think Vietnam. But Vietnam has a sort of like an authoritarian government, so they can make decisions very quickly.
Exactly.
Our part, any economic changes have to go through our U.S. Congress. It has to go through our National Economic Development Agency, and many things. And so the process sometimes takes 2 years. Our government, especially our economic manager, headed by Mr. Secretary Carlos Dominguez, has been pushing for a lot of changes and by law, an enabling law, to try and entice many of those companies, especially those that are leaving from, are moving from China. And we're open. I would say the only advantage that we offer, aside from the fact that we're prepared to go bend over backwards, is that we have this relationship, plus we're obviously an English-speaking country, right. That's why we have a lot of BPOs that are located in the Philippines. Mm-hmm. And we are hoping that many of these so-called special economic zones, and we have now the Green City, which is Clark. It's called the Clark City, which used to be the American base. Mm-hmm. It's a very attractive place for many businesses to come in. And as a matter of fact, we've been very busy with a lot of these webinars and economic forums, inviting people to see it. We're prepared to send them a video on what kind of development has taken place in Clark. We have a first-class airport, first-class cargo area. It's a great transshipment point for many, to go out to the many Asian countries. Obviously, geographically, we're located in the right place. And as President Trump, who's a real estate man, said, you have a very expensive and very valuable piece of real estate. And we do have. We're right in the center. Sure. So these are things that we're trying to hope. And again, I think if not for this pandemic, we would have had a lot of changes, because the Philippine Congress has been very cooperative with the economic managers in really trying to make a lot of changes to make it attractive for us. And I think it'll be even more, we will even be more aggressive after this pandemic is over, so that we can really, because everybody wants to attract all these businesses that are maybe not leaving all from China, but are moving around. And the Asian region is the growing market. We have 650 million people living in the Asian region. And so
definitely.
And also the ASEAN economic ministers are also continuously meeting and trying to see how we can all work together, because we all know that being together in this, we will be able to bring our countries into the first world.
Right. Yeah, and I think the ASEAN, integration is an important point there. And will we see the Philippines potentially join the TPP, or is that a bridge too far when it comes to sovereignty? Is that been a stated desire of the government?
Well, actually, when the TPP was started during the Obama administration, we were not invited.
Oh, okay.
Ironically, we were not invited. So.
Well, you don't have to worry about U.S. interference anymore.
But well, we are. I'm not sure where it is right now, but I know that we are working with many of our ASEAN or the ASEAN region into seeing how we can work together and having an economy that is cooperative and together. So I'm not sure whether. I think there are 11 countries have joined the TPP. Japan is one of those that is heading it. So we're not sure where that is right now. I'll be very honest about it.
Well, we do have some time for Q&A. I've certainly got more arrows in the quiver, but I will wait until I hear from our audience. And if you will, send them in the chat function to me. We've had one question about health and safety measures for arriving Filipino passport holders coming in at international airports. And it seems like one of your staff has answered that. I don't know if you want to address that really briefly.
Well, we of course are trying to protect our borders, and unfortunately we have a number of overseas Filipinos workers actually who came back to the Philippines, and they were infected with the COVID. So we have some measures that have been taken. Tests are conducted at the airport. It could take anywhere between an hour and a half to 2, sometimes even 3 hours, depending on the volume. and we require them to be to stay in a hotel for a couple of days to be sure that they're quarantined, and then before they're allowed to go home. It takes time for these tests, obviously, for the results to come. Like all countries, everybody's trying to protect their borders. It's bad enough that we have a lot of that already in the Philippines, but certainly we don't want to import any more.
Yeah.
And I'm sure many of our Filipino passport holders understand that we're just trying to help our country manage this as well as we can. So it's just something that we all have to face nowadays.
Yes, for sure. And I think if y'all need more information, many of the embassy staff are on here. So if anybody needs specific questions, I think you could probably chat to everyone in the window there, and they would be able to answer. There's already been one detailed answer. Brian Ramos of the Ramos Law Firm says, the Philippines is often hit hard by natural disasters. How is the Philippines handling its preparation for the upcoming storm season in light of the pandemic?
Well, that's another problem that we're really facing. Obviously, we have the National Disaster Coordinating Council, which has been in place for many years, and we definitely are perhaps more prepared than we were before. As you know, what happened to us during the biggest typhoon that hit any country was in Leyte, and that was, we had 10,000 people who died, and we thank many countries, particularly the United States, who came to help us. And I happened to be one of those that was able to get in touch with the U.S. Embassy. The military attaché there was a very close friend of mine, and I told him about it was a problem that no one can really help us except a country like the United States with its resources. And we were just lucky that the USS George Washington, which was an aircraft carrier, was actually on sort of like an R&R in Hong Kong at that time. And so they sent it right away to the Philippines, and they went right in the Gulf of Leyte. And you can just imagine the feeling of the people in Leyte who experienced, many of those who remember experiencing the return of Douglas MacArthur in 1944. And that was something that people will never forget. And that was, and that's the reason why, like I always say, that the relationship that we have with this country is very unique. It is very special, and all of us who are Filipino Americans, Filipinos, Americans who've had a lot of interaction with the Philippines. We have a lot of frontliners here that are Filipino descent. We have that special relationship that you can't buy that anywhere. And we need to nurture that. We need to try to respect each other as much as we can, and work together in improving not only our relationship, but be part of the world to make it better. This is really what is important, really, and that's the message that we always give to many of our friends here in the U.S., especially here in Washington, D.C.
Definitely. We had one question about, let's see, the investment opportunities. Issa Thompson says, if I were an investor, where would you recommend I focus my energies or resources in the Philippines? You know, I'm particularly interested in this question too. I think the baseline services infrastructure that the Philippines has may potentially provide some opportunity, particularly for Atlanta, which is a very services-oriented economy. It has many large Fortune 500 headquarters, as well as, you know, financial technology companies, and who may not have looked at the Philippines as intently as they should.
Well, with this pandemic, you can see, and we have a very young population. So we have a lot of young people who are tech savvy, as they call it. We have so many people who are actually in Facebook and whatever. You know, I'm not tech savvy myself, but I know many people in the Philippines are well connected in the digital world. So that is one area where definitely people can come in, and the infrastructure investment that is there, infrastructure in the technology. We just had some discussions with SBA, which is an American company, a listed company that builds towers. We intend to build 50,000 towers all over the country to improve our internet and our cellular system and technology. So all that's where the world is going. But in the Philippines, I know that we have all these youngsters that are really into it, and I think that if somebody has a great idea into bringing it to a country that in the Philippines, I can assure you, you're going to be not as rich as Jeff Bezos, but maybe close to him.
Nice. Well, we could all aspire to that goal, right? And maybe if we just get a tenth of his wealth, I think we'd probably be okay. We've got one question about, we've got a lot of questions about foreign passport holders, whether they can travel to the Philippines, particularly those who are, one question about those who are married to Filipinos, if they can bring their infants that have foreign passports. I think your staff is jumping on these questions, and if not, I hope they will. But in order to move along to some others, there was a question about J1 visas, Filipinos who are here on J1 visas, and whether they have all had to go back to the Philippines, or and I'd like to expand that to the question about the recent Trump proclamation on immigration that is kind of banning new issuance of these kinds of visas through the end of 2020. Is that going to affect y'all significantly?
Well, actually, we've suspended allowing any Filipino citizens going into the J1 because we've had a number of J1 visas. Well, they don't have, as you know, these are sort of like exchange, is an exchange program, and some of them have stopped this their employer at the moment, and we certainly we have no. I wouldn't say a budget, but the government takes care of our overseas workers, but the J1 is a different story altogether because it's supposed to be there. Whoever sponsored them here in the United States is supposed to take care of them and even bringing them back. So we've had quite a number of problems along that line, and we have our political, our public diplomacy in charge of coordinating this with the State Department that we've suspended any of these J1 visas until we get an idea of where this whole situation we're all in goes.
Got it. Well, we've had one question about trust in the Chinese Communist Party. You know, if you're getting assurances from the Chinese Communist Party that you can solve some of these issues bilaterally, how viable do you think that is, particularly? And I'm expanding on the question a little bit, but particularly as the U.S. is trying to raise the specter of China as this kind of global imperialist and evangelizing the world towards the virtues of communism. How do you sort of position yourself there?
Well, the real problem really is that obviously the issue involving the West Philippine Sea is something that is very ticklish on both sides. So we're sort of like traversing that road into it as carefully as we can. And as I said, our relationship with China is very important to us also. Even if we have a special relationship with the United States, and as a matter of fact, I've had discussions with many of our friends in the State Department. Asians really, all I think our Asian neighbors are the type that, it's like we have a suitor right now. I don't know if this is the right analogy, but we have somebody is going after us, but we're sort of like going or married to the United States, or have a relationship with the United States. So don't make us choose because we're going to choose you, but we need to deal with this as well as we can. So, and obviously that also helps in giving incentive to the Chinese Communist Party to be a little more serious, because we have a relationship with the United States, and they now recognize that what they did is not exactly well, as they said, it's illegal. It's not following the rule of law and everything. So I'm sure that they too do not want to confront country like the United States. And we've seen that in many communications coming from our embassy in Beijing, that nobody wants to have a beef with a country like the United States. It's still a superpower. And so we just have to balance it off between having a good relation with the country that we have issues with, and a country like the United States that we have a very special relationship, but we do have issues also. So that's just the world. We don't live in a perfect world, so to speak.
Right.
If we did, then we don't want to leave this earth anymore.
Exactly. Well, I had one question of my own, just about, you're talking about improving governance and, more faithfully adhering to our ideals and our respective constitutions. There was recently an anti-terrorism law passed in the Philippines. I don't know the deep details on it, but I do know that people are kind of concerned that that's going to be used as cover for the administration to go after its opponents. And there's been some high-profile press freedom, cases in the Philippines. As a journalist, as a media man yourself, I wonder how you feel about this, and particularly when you're trying to strengthen ties with the U.S. and there's so much skepticism about the Hong Kong national security law, which is feared in the same way. I mean, obviously, it's very different when you're talking about the Communist Party of China versus the democratically elected government of the Philippines. But I would also think there's probably more consternation over the fact that a democracy is seen as doing this versus an authoritarian regime. But can you just give us a little bit of thoughts on that?
Well, the anti-terror law has been really, we had one, but it was not. It was a weak. And I happen to know one of the main sponsors of this, Senator Panfilo Lacson, who's a close friend of mine, and we've discussed this on many occasions. And he is one of those. He used to be our chief of police. And he's been a senator for many years, and he's very strong about really going after terrorists in the Philippines, because he saw what kind of devastation they can do. And then Abu Sayyaf, the communist rebels in the Philippines, they're really not ideologists anymore. They're actually anarchists, or people who are out to kidnap and make money. They destroy towers, or they will threaten to destroy the cellular towers of private telco companies, and demand a ransom or some sort. And so we've had that, especially in the South. We all know what happened in Marawi City, where we had ISIS-leading terrorists activities there. Clearly, even the United States recognized that. And so you helped us with intelligence and a lot of stuff that we needed to do. So terrorism is very much present all over the world, and the Philippines is no exception. And we have suffered a lot of this, especially in the southern part of the Philippines. And so anti-terrorism is something that you've had a number of laws, and you have what they call the Patriotic Act, or we have the Homeland Security, which many of these things that really that would give a lot of latitude to many of the law enforcement to go after, to keep yourself secure. So we too have to do something like that. We need to secure our borders. We need to secure our people, because just because right now with this pandemic, we even have more activities that are coming out right now. And there's just been a travel advisory coming from your embassy, from the State Department, about a lot of these activities in the South. So I don't think it's fair for many people to think that this is really out to just get so-called enemies of the government. That's not quite true. As a matter of fact, I went through it with some of my friends in the legal world, and they said that this is there's a lot of safeguards here for people's rights. It just gives some latitude to just bringing in people who are suspected or have a very strong indication that they are in fact involved in terrorism. We've got that problem here. Believe me, we do have that. Ours is probably even worse than you have here in the United States.
Well, thanks for addressing that. I appreciate it. We are running out of time here. I want to end it on a sort of positive note. Obviously, physically, it'd be impossible for you to come here to Georgia right now, but I just wanted to see if you had a sense for particular collaborations or, future partnerships that may be fostered between Georgia or the Southeast U.S., which is kind of our area, and the Philippines, and how that might look, what mechanisms you might recommend for us, our governments or our chambers of commerce or others to see what opportunities are available there in the Philippines.
Well, I know that we have a fairly large Filipino American community in Georgia, in Atlanta, and certainly our honorary consul there, Mr. Ray Donato, can very well direct you to some of the things that are available for us to work on. We're very much interested, of course, in economic ties, and so there are many opportunities, really. Like I said, it's unique, the kind of relationship that we have with this country, and so that uniqueness is something that no other country can claim in that part of the world. So I would really encourage young people, business people who are starting off some business to connect with. We have a number of organizations in the Philippines that we can put you in touch with. That one is one major area where you can really be a part of. And unfortunately, because of the situation, this year was really the year that I was going to be traveling all over the United States. I had planned to do that. There are many plans that we had, and certainly Atlanta was one of the places that I wanted to very much visit. And I was looking forward to also attending the Democratic National Convention and also the Republican National Convention, which happens not too often, every 4 years. So, but all that is gone now. So we're just confined to our quarters, so to speak.
Yeah.
This is the best we can do it. And I certainly appreciate it very much, being invited to your organization to speak. And I really look forward to continuing our relationship with Atlanta. And I hope that we will have more of this down the road. If there's anything at all that you need from us in the embassy in Washington, we'd be very happy to do it. Thank you very much.
And thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate this. And we've had a very patient and persistent audience that's been with us the entire time. So we appreciate you all joining us. We've had some questions about follow-ups on business activity in the Philippines. So I will place in the follow-up email that we send out to the registrants some contacts from the embassy if they don't mind. And also we will ensure that everybody gets the recording to this as well. It's also been broadcast on Facebook. I want to thank Bob Kennedy from ACIR. I have a feeling that Bob wants to express his willingness to host you on your subsequent visit to Atlanta whenever that's possible. But Bob, you want to make a closing comment?
Well, absolutely. We'd be delighted to have you. And I want to thank the ambassador for taking time to be with us, Trevor, for you and Ray Donato making this happen. It was terrific. Again, when it's time and when we can, we'd love to have you here in Atlanta for a nice get together with the people here in the community. Thank you very much.
Well,
Thank you.
I'll be honored to join you anytime. And I'm honored to meet Bobby Kennedy. I'm a Kennedy fan, so I'm very happy to meet you, whether you're related to the Kennedys or not.
Great. Well, thanks, Ambassador. And y'all look out for the follow-up email, and we really appreciate you joining us. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thank you.